Welcome, Sanel. Sanel worked in China, a partner for, was it KPMG? KPMG, and recently moved. So she's based in Dunedin. So we were super excited when we heard that the XRB had a person working on sustainability issues in Dunedin. And we thought, wow, okay. So we want to bring her into the family and make her part of the team. So Sanel, it's great not to have you on Zoom, and it's great to have you here. And so welcome, and we look forward to, so you're going to talk about just the work that you're doing. Okay, so over to you. Oh, so yeah, do you want this? Would that be better? Okay, I'll take that one. There's like a relay team here. Okay. So welcome.
Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me okay? See where to stand. So hi everyone. I think as Ivan has said, it's great to be in Dunedin and actually being in a room, because being in Dunedin means I'm normally the one on Zoom and everyone else in the room. So when I got the invitation through and they said, oh, you know, if the levels allow, will you be here? I was like, yes. So climate related disclosures, I've been listening, you know, to the first 3 sessions, and it's like, oh, what is the role of the XRB? What is the XRB actually? And I think a few of you would have heard about reporting and financial reporting standards and assurance standards. But then XRB all of a sudden popping up when it comes to climate standards. So I thought I'll just take one step back and first just introduce the XRB, or the External Reporting Board, just so that everyone understands who we are and what we are doing, just very briefly, and then
I'm not even doing it.
Then give you the reason why I'm here. So as you can see, XRB, External Reporting Board, we deal with external reporting. And when Helen asked the question earlier, I thought, oh, good, she's asked the question of Andrea's, not of me. But we're in the standard setter. We are holding the pen. And when I listened to all of the satellites and all of those things going on, it's like, oh, okay, we're just holding a pen. But then I thought of the pen is mightier than the sword. So in the past, we've been setting accounting standards and we've been setting audit standards, that and financial reporting. So we're in that space. But we always had a vision. For a very long time, we've been in standard setting and established 10 years ago as a Crown entity. Vision is to have integrated reporting, not purely financial, actually looking at the much bigger picture that you'll find in all, you know, whatever you want to call it, ESG, external reporting, sustainability reporting, broader corporate reporting, so many different names. We just, for you know, simplicity, refer to this as integrated reporting, not the framework. For those of you that are used to the integrated reporting framework, this is not what we mean here. With integrated reporting here, we just mean all-encompassing reporting. So this is it's something that is dear to my heart from a corporate reporting. Been involved in this space for a very long time, and I can't wait for the day when we can have reporting that is really showing everything that the company is doing, not so much focusing only on the financial aspect. So that's our vision. And we were very excited when the legislation was introduced to start giving us, as the XRB, the actual powers in legislation to set climate standards, first of all, but also to set standards and guidance for integrated reporting, for that broader reporting aspect. Now, one of the slides that Ivan put up was that sort of curve, how things have built up over the last few years. And then you can see from about 2015, you can see the step changes happening in sustainable finance. And that's sort of how it feels for us when it comes to climate standards. Last year in September 2020, Minister Shaw said, we are going to have climate reporting framework in New Zealand. That was September 2020. This legislation was introduced at the end of October 2021. So if you think just from setting legislation to enable this framework to come in, within just over a year, we got legislation in place. That is an amazing feat for something like that to happen. Also, just in the world of standard setting, if you think of standards taking 20 odd years to actually be implemented and set in practice, the standard that we are working now we actually expecting to have that issued by December next year. So in the world of standard setting, to move at that pace is just huge. Very exciting, extremely exciting to be in this space at the moment. The legislation is not saying what we have to use. You'll see the 4 boxes on that slide. That is coming from the TCFD, or Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. Just to clarify, that is not in law that we have to have TCFD as the basis for our standard. But that was the expectation that was set. That is what came through in all of the announcements up to now. And that is also therefore what we are using in the standard, in setting the standard. We go first to the TCFD requirements, and they cover those 4 boxes that you see on your screen. Don't worry, I'm not going to get into the technical detail of the reporting requirements for another day. So as you can see, this is a timeline, and I just wanted to show you how quickly things are moving, because this feels this pace thing is always ongoing. You can see within the first year or 14 months, what's going to happen. We've already issued the first consultation paper. That was released on 20th of October this year. That consultation period is now closed, and we're just working through the analysis of the submissions. In March 2022, you are going to see the next consultation paper, and that's going to deal with the other 2 boxes, the strategy and the metrics and targets. So that's going to come out in March 2022. Then in July, we're going to bring everything together. So we're not trying just to have these odd consultations and then all of a sudden you're going to have a standard. The whole idea is that this is an iterative process, and we are getting that input all throughout the year. So July 2022, you'll be able to see what the actual standard is going to look like. As an exposure draft, that will also include other concepts that I will show you shortly. And then by December 2022, we expect to have New Zealand Climate Standard number 1 issued. So why is this so important? Because with those announcements, if you look on the screen, December 2022, it will be issued. With the announcements, the expectation was set that the first reporting will happen in 2023 in New Zealand. The legislation requires that the first reporting period starts after the first standard is issued. So if we issue the standard in December 2022, the first reporting period will start 1 January 2023. So for December 2023 year ends, that will be the first time that they will have to prepare a climate statement. That climate statement doesn't have to sit in your annual report. It can sit outside, but it can also be integrated. It's entirely up to the entity how they want to present it. So it's really a lot of flexibility, and this is the hope that it will bring people along the journey. So 1st January, the reporting period starts. December 2023 will be our first year ends to see that. Within 4 months of preparing your climate statement, you have to file the climate statement. So we'll see the first publications in April 2024 of climate statements in New Zealand. And then in the legislation, there is also an assurance requirement. Now, I marked the comment of Andrea's just a little bit earlier about third-party assurance. And yes, yeah, you can only provide assurance on what is put in front of you and the evidence that you can gather. But the legislation is asking that assurance be provided only over the GHG emissions disclosures. Now, for those of you familiar with the TCFD requirements in those 4 buckets, the greenhouse gas emission disclosures, only one aspect of the 11 key areas, only one disclosure. And the legislation is only requiring disclosures over that one, or assurance over that one disclosure about GHG emissions. Now, that's what we're currently working through. Just exactly what is our standard going to ask about GHG emission disclosures. So that is a topic for March 2022. But you can see the assurance regime begins in 2024. So we're going to see the first engagements to provide assurance over that disclosure for December 2024 onwards. David. So David's question is whether or not our decision is just asking about scope 1 and scope 2, or will we also ask about scope 3? At the moment, it's not fully decided yet, but likely it will cover all 3 or aspects of all 3. And I will also touch base back on that when it comes to how we are going to adopt, because there's some options that may come in to that, but not decided by all means yet. Okay. So the assurance will come in. There's also in the legislation, the ability for an entity to have voluntary assurance over the rest of the climate statement or parts of the climate statement, because we could already see internationally that investors are asking for assurance. That's just coming through more and more. So the legislation provides for that assurance to be provided over the rest of the climate statement, but that will be voluntary. Any assurance practitioner will need to follow the XRB standards. So we are also currently going through the process of just kicking the tires on our assurance standards and professional standards, because unlike financial statement audit, where we've got normally accounting firms providing that service, for the assurance over climate statements, we will have a much broader range of practitioners that will provide that assurance potentially. So we just need to make sure that that is fit for purpose for the new regime. So that means when we will report, what's going to happen is going to be in fully by the end of 2024. The question then is who will be caught under this legislation? And I think summary of the entities that will be caught, you can see it's focused on large. There was one thing that has changed from the original bill, because they just said all listed entities with listed debt or equity, and nobody liked that. So they've been back, and now it's large listed issuers. So that's a market capitalization of more than 60 million New Zealand dollars. The other definition for large banks, insurers, credit unions, blah, 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 that hasn't changed. That is still at the 1 billion mark. And also then for insurers, even if they don't hit the 1 billion mark, then if they've got 250 million of premiums, they will also be caught under this regime. Any questions? Yeah. Okay. So if we now get into the standards, what are we actually writing here? We've set down some principles, and I'm not going to go through all of those, but the key thing for us is that we are basing it on the TCFD requirements, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. And therefore, we are following and using the terms used in the TCFD as a starting point. We are consulting, and this is going to be a New Zealand standard. So if there's any comments or questions, that can be fed through, and we are free to depart and make changes so that it fits the New Zealand context. The key point there is the user need focus. What is workable in New Zealand? What do we need to see, and what updates do we need to do to make that work in New Zealand? The difficulty with this, though, is that the TCFD was set up as guidance, as a voluntary framework. So the wording is a little bit loose. When we come to a standard, it is legislation in New Zealand. It is part of law. And therefore, we do need to, firm up some of those things and put it into a structure that will make it comparable with normal law. But we are, we picked this up and we're running with it, and we're setting standards in a way that we've never done before. So we really want taking a fresh approach to this and making sure it's going to be workable. So what are you going to see in December 2022? I talked a lot about climate standard number 1. Climate standard number 1 is going to be the one that covers the 4 areas. Skinny, to the point. I also mentioned to David's question earlier, we've got an adoption standard. So climate standard number 2 is our standard that is going to tell you how to pick up this regime. How are you going to adopt the requirements in New Zealand? So some entities may just take climate standard 1 and they may just fully comply with it from day 1. Some of them have already maybe done this on a voluntary basis, so it will be easy. But we will have a lot of entities in New Zealand that have not done this before. We cannot ask entities just to fall into the regime in a year's time. So there will be Climate Standard 2, which is the standard that will tell you how you go about getting into the regime. And this is the point where we can put the choices in that I mentioned. You know, if it's your first year, maybe. Nothing here is set in stone yet, still being drafted. But maybe it's something like in year 1, you only do scope 1 and 2. And then from year 2, you start with some of your scope 3. It may be something like that. It may be also some of the other requirements in there that we bring in over time. So that standard is really the question that we ask of everyone. When you adopt these requirements, how do you think we can make this workable? How do you think we can introduce this and bring it into New Zealand to work in practice for all entities having to adopt this? Then we're also looking to develop a concepts standard. Now, the concept standard is basically the design principles that I mentioned to you. Some of those normal reporting requirements and the base assumptions that we would all sort of be familiar with, together all of those in a concepts doesn't really fit with the actual requirements. And also, as we build out and move on from climate only to also cover some of the other like social and governance disclosures, that document is the one that can be built out because it is not climate specific. We're starting off with climate, but remember the end goal is to be much, much broader than climate only. And then for us, we think the guidance piece that you've got on the slide, this is where the real value is sitting. Because standards take time. It needs to go through Parliament and become law, but guidance is something that we can change pretty quickly. So we can be very agile when it comes to the development of practice. And we listen and we'll hear later these 2 days about scenario analysis, about GHG emission accounting. All of those aspects will be developing. They have been developing very quickly, but we can see how they will be developing even further over the next few years. So we really don't want to be stuck with standards that are difficult to change. And therefore, this body of guidance may not be mandatory, but it is something that we want to work on and develop as we see the need arise. So what is the standard going to look like? First of all, we'll give you the overall objective. Remember on that design principle slide, we talked about principle-based. At the end, it's no use to have a disclosure list and people use it as a checklist and they just tick the boxes. We all know that's not a right approach to disclosure. Regulators love it, entities love it, but that is not the way to go about with these things. You really need to get to understand what the entity is doing. And therefore, we will set the objective of what you're trying to achieve. We will have some specific disclosures because there are a minimum certain things we would like to see. But then the middle bit is the important thing. How are you taking the specific disclosures and the objective and marry them up? What additional information do you need to provide in order to achieve the objective? Or are you putting so much gumph into your disclosures that nobody can tell what is going on? So also it's avoiding too much clutter, making sure you don't put stuff in that is totally irrelevant and help you hide some of the things that we heard about in the previous presentation. So very much, you know, a good flow of marrying the two up, but having the relevant information presented. Then in that slide, I'm not going to cover the detail, but those are basically the high-level aspects of the two sections that we consulted on in October and November, dealing with governance and risk management. Those are more process-related disclosures. And really, entities should all be doing this now. So those are not the hard ones. Those are the easy ones to tick off, and people can already start working on those and bringing it in. Because it's really just saying, what are you doing currently? It's factual reporting rather than changing in systems and anything like that. And then what are the issues that we are looking at further? I'm not going to go into the detail because I'm not the one holding the pen on this. Others are holding the pen. But as I mentioned before, we're already looking at what guidance should we provide on scenario analysis. You know, we have this tension between relevance versus comparability when it comes to this. I mean, do we come up with the scenarios that entities have to report against, or do we leave that for the market? You know, that's something that will need to be sussed out. The standard will just have the main requirements, but as I said, in the guidance, that's what we need to be looking out for. GHG emissions, again, we've got the GHG protocol, which is the sort of starting point of all of this, but what else? What other guidance do we need to provide in order to make that workable for entities? And also, to the assurance point, making sure that we've got sufficient guidance and requirements in the standards in order to do the assurance properly. Also with the assurance, one of the things that we are looking at is what is the level of assurance to be provided? Is it reasonable, as in a positive statement that the climate disclosures comply with the framework, or is it negative? So we call it limited assurance. So we need to think of that level that we're going to set, and do we set mixed levels maybe? So that's something exciting from the assurance world to be looking forward to. Okay, then the comment period is closed, but we're expecting some late submissions. So if you're so invigorated now to make a submission on the disclosures, then by all means, just let the team know. I'm sure they would be delighted to hear. We've received 70 submissions already, very positive on what has been presented so far. And looking forward to the key messages. Unfortunately, it's been only a week, so we'll cut them some slack. And, you know, I said, don't worry, don't need to have the key messages that came out of it just within a week. We'll work through those and we will present them on the website shortly. Then just a couple of other things you can see around the globe, things are happening already. That momentum is building across, and some mandatory requirements we can see in a number of countries. The key thing there that you can't see behind you know, the screenshot is the International Sustainability Standards Board. That is the international board that was established at COP26, and that will be setting the international standard. And we are working closely with all of the international bodies to make sure that the New Zealand standard is not way out here, so that, you know, we're out of sync. So there's constant talking and discussing and seeing where things are developing and working together by the time the standard's coming out so that they are consistent. And then just last plug for some of the other work that's going on. As I said, climate is our focus. We have to have the standard out next year, and that's what we're working towards. But we haven't taken our eye off the big ticket item, which is integrated or the broader reporting. We've already started doing work on that. It is hugely exciting. It is a totally different world, and you know, opened my eyes also to what can be possible, because we have met with a number of brilliant Maori leaders in the community, and we've started to talk to them about the Te Maori worldview and just what does that mean. And we feel like in New Zealand, we have already in our DNA how to live and to think in an intergenerational, sustainable way, all about well-being, all of those aspects. How can that translate into a framework for New Zealand, Aotearoa New Zealand, that encompasses all of our reporting, that we can ground our future reporting in that Te Maori worldview. So that is what our steps. Climate is there, but we've got a much bigger vision to pursue for Aotearoa New Zealand. Very hugely excited, and we are looking for people to come and help us get this framework going. So any questions?
Fantastic, Sanel. I'll pass over to you, Richard. So, but just bigger picture. So Andreas provided insight into the EU taxonomy and how that is affecting investment funds. And then Sanel provides a related how we're doing climate risk related disclosures. So thank you very much. So that's how those two linked. Richard.
Thank you very much, Sanel. Richard Blakey here again. So a little bit physicist related, but also thinking of my role in an institution. Actually, I really liked, and my remarks and question is related to a quote that's sometimes given to Einstein, but I think came from somewhere else. Not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that is counted counts. And I think in the latter, you've shown again in your standard, I like the phrase, to not obscure relevant information by the inclusion of insignificant detail. So I think that's quite critical, and I value that. My question is related to the bold ambition and intergenerational ambition of integrated reporting. But that first part, not everything that matters can be measured, or not everything that counts can be counted. How far can we go in terms of having measures and standards that will be allowing this to happen? And how much do we have to say, actually, there's a whole lot of elements of values and culture and society and how we operate that must sit outside this?
Yeah. So I think that's a really good point, and that's actually something that has come up in these tuanangas that we've already had. Is you know, the TCFD and what we've done so far is all about entity reporting. It is based on capital markets. The users that we focused on are the capital markets, or the providers of capital or insurers. So this steps even out of that space. So when you start getting into the different users, then some of those aspects become more relevant than what we were thinking of. And one of the key messages, lots of key messages that we had coming out of the tuanangas, but one of them was being agile, is allowing entities to really identify their users, what they need, what do they value, presenting their impact. And yes, we will have to have some measures, you will have to have some maybe baseline things, but we really should make sure that we're agile enough so that you can bring those aspects in and not try and put everything carved in stone to come out. So that is one of the things, and we'll have to learn as a profession also to cope with that, because that's the hard thing. It's all, you know, some people write very well. For us that are more numbers focused, we like to count and things that we can measure directly and verify, but that's a huge leap when it comes to the verifiability of that, because that's the next question. How are we going to provide assurance reports over those things?
And sorry, just to follow up, and it's quite good, useful, because one of the things we're thinking about in the research sector more generally is about research impact and impact measurement frameworks. And we're, I think, aligning to a view that you want some direct measures, you want some proxies, but a huge amount is also built around case studies and narratives that will support, are you actually having real effect and real meaning? That's largely retrospective. And the challenge, though, is to, I guess, in this space, it's hugely open to interpretation, and one could say greenwash if you allow it to be too open. But just mechanisms for framing case studies is another thing that we're looking at research impact wise.
And also what you just mentioned is a lot of it is actually retrospective, is looking back, where this information is forward looking. And that's another area that we as accountants will struggle with, because we used to be checking things that have happened. And now you'll have to, you know, look forward, and there will be assumptions, and it's not, you know, something that you will just tick the box easily. It will be interpretation. But it is hugely exciting if you think, you know, at our age, we can still be part of all of this. And
for us old folk, right? But for the young guys, is
our young ones.
Yeah, all the young. There's plenty of young ones in here. That's a future. I'm just thinking this is like for the accountants in the room, and how this is being stepped in New Zealand, and you know, it's a gold mine for research. Thinking of Palab and Denithi at the back. I'll let one of the accountants ask.
Thank you, Ivan. Thank you for your presentation. It's amazing to see as a researcher in accounting disclosures that these mandatory disclosures in climate change is coming into New Zealand, although a bit behind with the rest of the developed nations. One comment and one question. So the comment is that you mentioned about how the standards are going to be agile and principle-based. So our research into New Zealand context shows that the principle-based approach in New Zealand context does work really well. So it's really great to have that mandatory flavor with the principle-based approach, so that the companies can blend their disclosures that suits the users, as you said. So that's great. And my question is that we know that large companies in New Zealand contribute lower levels to the GDP and to the economy, and small and medium-sized enterprises does contribute significantly, including the farming sector, to the greenhouse gas emissions and to the economy. So what is the approach by XRB to bring in some sort of a disclosure, at least as a principle based for those small and medium-sized enterprises?
Oh, I'm so glad that was an easy question, because
I'm sorry, can I also add to that? Actually, one of the things,
No, but now you're
so
making the
this
question hard.
SMEs, I think the SMEs is quite an easy question. I think you cover them by the banks, but I think the harder question is private enterprises. I'm thinking of Methanex, I'm thinking of the smelter. So 2 questions for you there. Large private companies that are big polluters that are tied to multinational.
But my answer still remains quite easy. The XRB is not the one that's setting the requirements. We just write the standards. So the entities that will have to report, we do not have the power to tell entities that they have to report. Your requirements for reporting is set in legislation. So that is our get out of jail free card, I guess.
So our SMEs are not really covered by it, but I think the SMEs are in effect. I think that's one of the beauties of the legislation. If we're a bank-based financial system, right? And so SMEs fund themselves through banks, and the banks have to report. I think that's the way you're capturing SMEs. It's not SMEs that worries me. It's the Methanex. It's the the smelters that, as far as I can tell, it's not clear if they're covered. Or do you want to comment on that?
No, so they are not covered directly. You're totally right. The legislation is only looking at our listed issuers and those buckets. So if you look at the legislation, it's very narrow, who are required to prepare the climate statements. But it is through the voluntary reporting. It is going to be through even large suppliers. I would say will go beyond the banks. The banks, yes, will have to get the information because they will have to do their scope 3 reporting. But if you look at the suppliers, we've already heard suppliers saying to their customers and to their suppliers, up and down the value chain, or please give us the information from your entity, so that we can bring that in, because we need to put that in our scope 3 emissions. So if we start getting into really including all of scope 3, that's where the push is going to come, in my view, even without the legislation being in place.
I see lots of hands up, but I'm going to be we need to keep to time. We've got a lot of presentations. So we've got morning tea. So Sebastian and David, you can grab Sanel. Are you going to be around most of the day?
Yeah. I'm here for 2 days.
Oh, you're here for 2 days. Okay, fantastic. And as I said, hopefully we can get you to join the team, because it would be great to have you. So the XRB, give her permission to be part of the team. So that's an official request. So wonderful to have you here in person. It's great that this expertise is in Dunedin. Thank you very much, Sanel, and Sebastian and David. You can grab her at morning tea. But I know New Zealanders, they care about one thing over everything else, and that's morning and afternoon tea. So we'll stick to time. Thank you, Sanel. So those of you online will be back in at 11:15.